Hello, everybody. This is Piero Giorgio, author of Survive the Economic Collapse. Today, I have with me someone I admire very much, Chris Martenson. Hello, Chris.
Hey, Piero, it's good to be with you.
Excellent. I've been, first of all, thank you very much for all the work you've done. I've been checking out a Crash Course, first of all, the DVDs, and then your first book, Crash Course, and your website, Peak Prosperity. It was fundamental in my change and understanding on how we need to assess the terrible uh, conjunction of problems that are happening at the same time in the last 5 and next 5 years. And so, first of all, thank you, and I'm very happy to talk to you today about your new book. Can you tell us a little bit what brought you to get to Crash Course and then Peak Prosperity, and to think the way you do today?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it was. I would love to tell you it was some blinding, beautiful beam of light came down and anointed me with this special challenge. What happened was I noticed my stock portfolio getting killed in 2000, 2001. I'm a scientist by training. I have a PhD in neurotoxicology. Anyway, I love data and I form hypotheses. And I also have an MBA and worked in corporate finance for a while. So I have really a science background. I have a love of numbers, and I really wasn't paying attention. Everybody was a genius in the '90s, right? And
Hmm.
and then when my portfolio was really getting ripped, like everybody's, 2001, I really started to look into what was happening. And the more I dug into the economy, the more worried I got. And these were really quaint things I was worrying about by today's standards. Deficits in the low hundreds of billions, and the Fed would be printing $5 billion every so often. These were small things, but enough to get me concerned. I'm a curious guy. I started digging around, and I discovered that our economy, based on our money system, is exponentially designed, so it has to constantly grow or it gets in trouble. I said, well, the economy is sort of a construct. What is growth really? Well, it comes from resources. I understood energy better. I dug into it. I discovered something called peak energy, peak oil, and thinking about peak energy. I really a transformative book for me early in that was The Long Emergency
Yeah.
by Jim Kunstler, who wrote the forward in your book, and I also read pieces by Heinberg. So I started consuming all this peak oil idea, and then I started connecting all of that to this idea of the economy, to the environment, which is the things we take out of the natural world and the stuff we put back in. Resources out, waste back. And when I put all three of these E's together, I just came up with one conclusion, which is the whole economic system is fundamentally unsustainable. And that means it's going to change someday, probably slowly and long grinding sort of a way, but maybe quickly and sort of catastrophically. I didn't know. So it really caused me to change my life dramatically. I quit my corporate job to start a blog. So nobody should ever ask me for career advice, right? That's a bad decision. But I had to do it. Now that's when it became a passion. I really became passionate about telling people about this thing that became the crash course, which is, a series of videos that connect those three big E's: economy, energy, environment, plus, I guess, the fourth E, environment, exponential growth. So all of that came together, and that's the problem definition side of everything. That's the predicament definition. It's saying, look, people, here's the data. Here's where it adds up. The conclusion of unsustainable usually leads people to then, after their bowels tighten back up, and they get their breathing back under control, they say, all right, that all looks a little scary, but what should I do? Right? And so now we have to wander into the solution side of this, and that's where this next book sort of popped out. It's the answer to the crash course, as it were, where the crash course is saying, here's some things that are coming you need to know about, and by the way, they're not all rainbows and unicorns.
Absolutely. So this new book is titled Prosper.
Prosper, and the subtitle is How to Prepare for the Future and Create a World Worth Inheriting.
So this would be a topic that is very much of interest to my readers and my listeners here, as we once we acknowledge the problems, we also acknowledge that our ability to change the world is quite limited, to say the least. At least we can act and prepare ourselves. And I have ordered your book. I still haven't received it, and I look forward to read it during the the Christmas holidays. Can you tell us a bit about what's inside and what do you advise people to do?
Certainly. So, the book takes just a chapter, a quick chapter, to sort of summarize the three E's so that somebody who's just picking it up by itself will at least have the orientation to understand why the rest of the book exists. And then the rest of the book really goes into what it means to be resilient and how you can truly become resilient and engaged in the world. And we have the same philosophy you do, which is that we don't spend any time trying to coax people into thinking about how we're going to fix this at the global level or the national level. We spend 0 chapters on politics or how to be effective at influencing things at the national level or international level. We don't start there. We think if we could summarize this book, it's to go back to maybe a Mahatma Gandhi quote, which is, "You have to be the change you wish to see." So it's fine for everybody to be concerned about global climate change or over exuberant money printing or things like that. But if you yourself are not personally reorienting your life to accord with the facts that are out there, then you're probably going to be fairly miserable. So we have a number of framing chapters in there, and here's one. It talks about we named it "Mind the Gap." After you step off the tube in London, and they have that lovely voice telling you to mind the gap. For us, there's a gap that exists between what people know and what they're doing. And if there's a gap there, if you know something is there's a risk to you and you're doing nothing about it, you're going to live with anxiety or fear. We think that's unfortunate, especially if you can do something about it. So, simple example. I talk to people all the time who live on top of active earthquake fault zones in California who have not taken the $100 and 10 minutes it takes to buy a 72-hour emergency kit, right? Even though everybody knows they should, and even the government, FEMA, will tell you ought to do this, and there's lots of social support, and nobody will frown at you if you do this, people still don't do it. And it's unfortunate because whether they're aware of it or not, they're unconsciously or consciously living with an anxiety, a fear over that gap between what they know, which is that an earthquake not only can but will happen someday, and the fact that they've done nothing about it. So that's a fairly trite example, simple example, but those sorts of gaps, Piero, exist in people's portfolios, in their personal health, in their sense of isolation and lack of deep social connections that would be important in certain future outcomes. There's lots of things that people aren't doing despite mountains of evidence to say it's really time to start doing things. So that's an example of the kind of framing that we're using to help people understand why we think that not only you should become prepared, but now is a good time to start. And then we go from there and we break the idea of becoming resilient. I'm very sorry. Into 8 separate forms of capital. So financial capital, everybody's familiar with, right?
Yeah.
That's easy. So we spend a big chapter on that, and we say, hey, understand your financial capital. Really, take the time, get a balance sheet, go through your cash flows, really understand your expenses. Have the money you do have in the markets managed really well by people who know the true risks today. If you have to have money in the markets, otherwise, we want you to pull money out of the markets, and also we'd love for you to dedicate a portion of your financial capital, a portion, towards building your capital in these other 7 areas. And so those other areas are really important. And they include things like living capital, emotional capital, knowledge capital, cultural capital, your social capital, things like that. So we have a group of those, and so it's really a structured way for people to begin to really build their diversified wealth beyond money.
I see. So these seven capitals plus 1, so 8 capitals. It seems to me that in the last, let's say, 30 years, the big focus for not only Americans, the Western world in general, and one should include Chinese and Japan and Asian people as well, has been on developing as much as possible financial capital to be able to buy lots of toys, lots of stuff, big house, big cars, and so on. And the other 7, and you quoted 5 of them, but I can presume that they are very much those that used to be very strong in the old days, our grandparents, and because they were part of the small village, the neighborhood, and we have lost them. Is that what you perceive as well? And if so, how can we develop them?
Absolutely. I think that a lot of what Adam and I wrote in this new book, Adam Taggart being
Yeah.
my business partner at Peak Prosperity, a lot of what we wrote in this book, Piero, would not be at all surprising to your grandfather or great grandfather. Modern culture has a lot to offer, but we should always be clear that what usually a gift comes with a shadow. And so the shadow in our culture right now for a lot of people in Western culture and Asian cultures is that they're incredibly isolated. And that isolation leads to all kinds of things that are not happy or healthy for you, regardless of whether we're talking about a potential future economic calamity or not. This isolation leads to things where people end up with addictive personality behaviors, whether it's too much video games, too much drinking, overt drug use, whether that's legal or so-called illegal, prescribed, unprescribed, whatever. Those sorts of senses of isolation are the shadow side of our hyper-connected, cell phone-driven sort of way of interacting with each other. Guess what? Turns out being in direct relationship with other humans is important. And we should know that, because what's one of the worst punishments you can mete out to somebody in prison? Well, it's solitary confinement. People have created their own solitary confinement units, as it were, and that's having bad effects. So one of the forms of capital that we really promote in this is social capital, and it's around the idea that having deeper, more authentic, richer relationships with people is important. And so we have a point of view about how to get there. And it's not just how many people you know, and it's not that you know their name or what they do. It's deeper than that. When you know why somebody behaves, they behave, now you're starting to get really kind of deep into that, into who they really are, and to really be connected with other humans in a way where it's not transactional. It's not I give you this so that in the future you give me that, but it's relational, is incredibly important. And this is critical, because often, Piero, we'll have a couple come up, and one of the couple is really scared and they want to get out of the city and they want to move somewhere, and they would like to get away from what they consider to be risks. And they're looking at it from that angle. They see the safety angle, or maybe they're thinking about it financially, and the other partner might be really deeply socially enmeshed, and there's a lot of value in that, but the first partner is not valuing that. Right, and so they're just saying, no, the safety is more important, and let's get out there, and we need to be secure and all of that. But social capital is really important, right? Learned a lot when I was talking with a gentleman who wrote a book about the collapse of Zimbabwe's currency and the devolution of its society.
Oh.
And it turned out that people saw this coming in Zimbabwe. Very smart. They bought gold. They stored up some petrol. They put some food away.
Sure.
That all lasted about 6 months, right?
I
Or
was
a year.
living there when it happened.
And so how did
confirm.
people survive in years 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? The answer was those with deep social connections
Yes.
managed much better than those without, because they knew where to find stuff, how to get it. They were still supported, and those with poor social connections fared much worse. So our advice is, listen, we're not saying we're going Zimbabwe's route, but if we do, hey, social connections are going to be important. But even if that doesn't happen, you're going to be more valued by others, happier, and living with greater purpose if you have these deep social connections today. So why not start working on those now?
I agree, and I can concur. I used to live in Zimbabwe in 1998, and I've seen the effects of that. And indeed, these social connections have been lost and are being lost even in places like Africa, by the way. How can we? Are you telling in the book how can we restart those? It seems we are handicapped in a social way. It's very hard to even meaningfully go and say hello to people and be curious about them. And where should we stop? Where should we start? Drop leave our phones at home?
Yeah, it really is. There's so much that's really what we all want deep down, right, Piero, is we want to be seen. We really want to be seen and understood by the people around us. We want the opportunity to mentor others, to give and receive, right, to express our unique gifts, whatever those are. and to help other people express their gifts, right? And so there's a whole journey that we're supposed to be on from infant to elder, and a lot of our culture sort of truncates that and stops it. As soon as you become an effective consumer, like your journey's over, as it were. And so yes, we have a lot of advice that we've picked up over time about how to really go about advancing your social capital. And so really we're talking about the foundations of community, and we have advice in there, how you go about maybe involving yourself in your community. That's simple ways. There's already an existing structure in every community around you, right? There's church groups, neighborhood watches, volunteer committees, sports clubs, local government, whatever. Involving yourself is one thing. Creating new opportunities or reasons for engagement is great. I have bees and I have lots of fruit trees, and when the honey and the fruit come out, I go and hand them out around the area. That's a simple thing, but it's surprising how much that really helps. And then we really advise people to think about how you be in service. Now, here's the funny part. There's two parts to being in service. It's relatively easier for everybody that I've talked to, including myself, to give. We all want it, we think, being in service, that means I give, right? So I'll go and I'll give my honey. That's easy for me to do. Or I'll go and give at the local soup kitchen, or I'll give money. Those things feel easy, but in this, giving means nothing without receiving. And so one of the things we advise people to do is to create opportunities where you can receive, because if that loop doesn't close, a whole lot of social capital gets lost on the table. If everybody in the community wants to give, who do they give to?
I agree.
It's kind of like, you probably know somebody who receives a birthday gift or a Christmas gift really well, just so graciously, and it just makes that gift such a more valued thing. And even if deep down they don't really want the thing, right? Graciously receiving is a skill, and it takes time. It's not. Some people are automatically good at it, but for the rest of us, like me, it's something to learn. So these are a few of examples of the kinds of things we go into in this chapter, because of course we can't tell anybody how to deepen their social connections exactly, but we can say here are the things that work and things you might try, and they are skills to be built.
Mm-hmm. It's for those who are listening and who have read my book, this seems to be a development out of my chapter 7 of my book. So it seems very interesting. I look forward to read Prosper. Now, Prosper also means development, growth. Sometimes prosperity is, and I get the paradox where you say that our prosperity has peaked. And I presume that what you're saying is we need to redefine what prosperity means so that we can keep prospering, just that it's a different way of prosperity than the one we're used to, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's an important concept because we've been marketed to constantly that prosperity and wealth and currency or dollars or francs or euros, that's what we mean. And, you're wealthy if you have money. But none are so poor as those who only have money. And we really advise that we need to start thinking about true diversification of our wealth and our prosperity. So when are we prosperous? If you don't have your health, you're not. I don't care how much money you have, you're not prosperous. And if you don't have your emotional stability and resilience, doesn't matter how much of any of the rest of this you have, you're not going to be in good shape or position. So what we're really talking about is redefining some important things. What is prosperity? What is investment? Wall Street has really taken over, and London has really taken over this idea that investment means you earn a little extra capital and you send it off to Bank Street or Wall Street and hope for the best. And what we want to do is have people understand you invest in yourself, you invest in your house, your homestead, you invest in your community, invest in small local businesses where you can really understand the true risks and opportunities in any particular thing where you're actually deploying your capital. So we want to reclaim that word investment for people. Got a lot of advice on that and ways to invest that actually, we think, recapture that word invest. And then for prosperity, the part you started with, for us, we're really prosperous when we're safe, right? I know some really wealthy people live in Mexico. I don't consider them prosperous because they are 24/7, 365, surrounded by armed guards and worried about shootings and kidnappings. It's just, I am not happy if I'm not constant, if I know my family isn't safe. And you're really prosperous when you're living with great purpose. Big chunk of this book and another book that Adam wrote on his own is all about finding your authentic career. There's people out there trapped in careers they hate. They really don't like it. They don't know what to do about it. They're kind of waiting for something to shift in their life. So for us, prosperity is, you're living with purpose, you're healthy, you're happy, you've got deep social connections, you're safe and secure from daily social or actual physical harm. Those are the kinds of things that truly create prosperity. And the good news for this, for maybe many people listening to this, a lot of that stuff doesn't require money to acquire. In fact, some of it you can't buy. And so what we're really doing with this book is building on the work of a lot of other people to say, hey, the opportunity in this crisis of the times we live in, the opportunity is to say, well, how do I really want to be? Maybe this is time to really take a good hard look at who I am and how the world is and where I want to be positioned. Like, there's times in life when it makes sense to step back, reevaluate, get your strategic plan together, really think things through, and then it becomes an invitation to really step into the life that you should be living, that you want to be living, because, hey, life isn't a dress rehearsal. One of the forms of capital I didn't mention in the 6 that I threw you is time capital. Everybody has a little less time today than they had yesterday. Nobody knows how much they've got, so use it wisely and really step into this idea that we're not living for the future, we're living for the present moment. And Prosper, our book, is really a lot of it, Piero, centers on how to understand that we are not here to live in fear of the future or in regret from the past, but to be in this moment, living fully, authentically, and as happily as we can.
That sounds very good common sense. And in fact, I encourage people to check out your website, Peak Prosperity, as it has a lot of articles, of course, some analysis of the current ongoing situations in the world, but certainly a lot of articles and you've interviewed a lot of experts who also help perhaps to complete and give further information to listeners on how they can start growing indeed their bees or their garden or setting up groups of mutual help in where they live. Now, the question is this message seems to be one that resonates a lot with I think great intellectuals and thinkers like yourself, but also Richard Heinberg or our friend Kunstler or Dmitry Orlov or Gerald Celente. And actually, last time I was meeting him up in New York, he was telling that the fastest growing industry in the United States today is organic farming, and that a lot of young people who are not interested to go to college anymore and get indebted for their life are instead opting to build local farms, small proximity shops to sell farm produce locally that is organic, healthy, and therefore have perhaps less money, but at least a more connected, less debt as well, and more connected local life. Now the question is, do you see this as a real trend? Is it something that we need to, and I presume yes, we need to grow more? And is it still not, so this is a hypothesis, something that the mainstream economy and media will actually not like at all?
Well, no, they won't, because the mainstream media is there to help defend and advance the status quo. And the status quo really has a lot of guardians and a lot of defenders, of course, people who might lose their jobs if it changes. But let me put it into generational terms. In America, we have the baby boomer generation, but let's just roughly say anybody who's over 50 years old, 55 right now, they really desperately don't want the status quo to change, because guess what? They put their whole life into it and their savings are there, and they bought into a story, a narrative that said if you work hard and save your money, you'll be able to retire, and there'll be sunsets and Mai Tais with little umbrellas in them. And so they've got that whole dream. They don't want to give that up. But the younger people, the millennials, as they're called in my country, but say people under the age of 30, they look into this future and they say, hang on, this narrative that you're asking me to buy into doesn't make sense. And they get it, right? In increasing numbers, they really get it, that it doesn't make sense. There's no real social contract that applies anymore. The government will change the rules whenever they want. There's a different set of laws for those at the very top than the people at the bottom. They understand that the social security systems that they are forced to pay into will not be there for them, mathematically impossible when they grow up. So it's just like throwing money into a furnace. And that in many cases in my country, there's been a profound failure to invest in the things that will really advance the future of our country. Crumbling infrastructure, really bad Wi-Fi, horrible cell service, stuff like that. Because we're spending all our money on other stuff. And so what I see, Piero, increasingly is this generational gap between the older folks who are saying, listen, I have to preserve the status quo at all costs. And the younger people are saying, I gain nothing from the status quo. And that's growing wider and wider, that gap. And unfortunately, both parties are correct. And so how do we begin to close that conversation is an important dialogue to have, but we're not having it. Among many other important dialogues, we're not having. Whether we just looked at the increasing levels of indebtedness, 200 trillion across the world, up 58 trillion since 2007. Yikes! Or look what's happening in Greece at this particular moment. Oh my God! A whole discussion around that. Or what's happening environmentally, species loss. The fact that I don't have grandchildren, but by the time I do, every single major African animal that's a feature in a storybook might be extinct at that point in time. No more rhinos, no more apes, right? We should really be having a serious conversation about that, among many others. And so we're not having that serious conversation. At least the status quo keepers aren't. Mainstream media isn't doing it. That's why you and I do what we do. That's why I talk to individuals, I talk to groups, I talk to people who've got money, who don't have money, but I'm talking to them directly. I'm not trying to influence anybody in the mainstream media or in Congress or any other places because frankly, they can't. Their job requires them not to listen to me. So that's a hard conversation to have, and I don't have time to waste that way. So that's what I'm seeing. But increasingly, people are waking up. They're getting it. The main narrative is breaking down. People are increasingly uncomfortable. Those who can process that find it's an emotional journey. They seek people like us out. They wrestle with it. It's not easy. They go through some emotionally difficult times at times, anger and sometimes depression or whatever, and then they come out of that and they begin to positively step into taking charge of what they can. That's healthy. What's unhealthy, and that I see in my country, people who can't handle these changes, well, suicide is now the leading cause of unnatural death in my country, and this is mostly people who don't otherwise know how to handle the fact that their story of their life doesn't make sense anymore, so they check out in the ultimate way. And we're seeing increasing violence in the police against the citizens and citizens against each other, because this is just, I consider police the lowest form of management in defending the status quo. They're just like the petty boss with not a lot of power, but enough to really make your life unpleasant. But we're seeing this sort of breakdown in civility happening. And again, I think that's happening because the people who are expressing that anger, that rage, they're just confused. They don't know why their lives aren't working anymore because they don't have the context. They don't understand what's really happening out there, which is the whole world is going through an entire upheaval, and it's going to be with us for a while.
Yeah, it's a change of civilization, whether we like it or not. And as you said before, indeed, if you wish, both sides are correct in trying to defend or to try to change, to prevent change or to change. But I think you and I know they don't have any choice in that, because the mechanics and the data and the inertia that is linked to the data from energy supply, raw resources, and the slowdown that the economy that is reflecting that is unstoppable. It's not anymore a political choice. It's just the way it's going to happen, and there's nothing. Even great powers like United States or China can really do much. This process has started, and it has its own chemical, as you know, chemistry. Sometimes once the combustion starts, it starts, and it's not something that you can then get to a different state of the matter, and then you have to adapt. And I think you're right. People who are following you and who are doing the things, who are reading your books, they are doing these changes and they are adapting already to a world that otherwise the adaptation will be perhaps too hard, and then it's going to be natural selection.
Well, it will. So you're right. The forces are already in motion, and a different metaphor than a chemical reaction might be, a woman who's pregnant, who's about to give birth, saying, "I don't want to do this. Stop." Right? I don't want to do this. Like, no, that. Sorry, honey. That started 9 months ago, and now it's happening. Right?
Yes,
that no choice is a choice in this environment. So the longer we delay, the longer we avoid having this conversation about anything. Let's just say, the entitlement programs, or a bankrupt pension program. Sure, ignore it, but every day you ignore it means that the number of good outcomes shrinks badly, and in fact, you cross a Rubicon at one point where there are no more good options. There's only a palette of increasingly bad options, and that's my chief complaint about having my culture, or maybe even the world culture, say, we're going to wait until this is a real crisis before we, seriously consider this. Because, of course, once you actually get to the crisis, you get all these people who stand up and say, a crisis is no time to really, change things. And so it feels like it's always like the default is always never to change. And it's insane when you watch, people, here's a simple example. Saudi Arabia decided in the 1980s that they were going to pump an aquifer that was laid down during the last glacial period 10,000 years ago. This one shot of water, they decided they were going to grow wheat in the desert. And that was great for a while. They got up to like 30,000 tons of wheat production or something crazy. And now the water's out. Of course, the desert's gone back to desert. They are no longer growing anything but a little tiny specialty wheat for certain religious purposes, but they are now a net wheat importer, and they have no water. So now they're using their oil to desalinate water at extraordinary energy expense. Yes. And when the oil's gone, you now have however many 100 million people living in a desert with no water and no energy.
They'll invade Europe.
They will. And that's why I was just asked recently by somebody from Europe saying, this refugee crisis, like, whoa, that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you think that's a problem, wait until 100 million people from the Middle East, North Africa region, for environmental and energy reasons, decide they don't want to be there anymore.
And therefore it will be war. Because it's a question of, that's how human history works. I mean, migration of people leads to war. There's never been migration that is peaceful. Look at the Aborigines, look at the American Indians. They were the locals. But no, I agree. And the less we sort these problems, and we're not, no one is. I mean, we can work locally, and that's what I'm never. And I agree with what you say. A lot of people are, and for a lot of our listeners, they always send me questions about, can we change politics? What do you think of such and such a party or such a? It's too late. And what can we influence? However, we can influence your life. We can influence our own life, the way how we develop these skills, these capitals that you mentioned. I will. I don't want to take too much of your time. Maybe one last question before I can eagerly read your book. Hopefully, it will arrive soon. A lot of our readers and listeners today are European. They are in England, they are in Germany, in Russia. Some are in Arabic countries, and a lot of them, maybe they don't have the knowledge. Of course, but I used to live in the United States as well. And you probably traveled a lot in around the world. What is the big difference on how people are starting to move from your experience or your perception from North America and perhaps New England, where you live, towards other parts of the world where you live? Do you see places that are catching faster, or do you see United States leading this?
No, definitely not leading it. When I go and do seminars and talks and things down in Latin America, which, that for me, that's Mexico on south, it's much easier conversation to have because, if you're in Peru and you say, hey, sometimes currency systems collapse, they say, yeah, I'm 40 years old. I've seen it 3 times, right? They have the Nuevo Sol, which replaced the Sol, which replaced the, and so on. So there's no convincing that has to happen there. They jump right to the other part, which is, yeah, we know sometimes things go sideways, go bad. And so how would I want to begin to prepare for that? And so there are pretty vast differences as well. And a lot of Latin America have much stronger family bonds and relationships, so they're a little deeper in social capital to begin with in many ways. And increasingly, you find that people are in other areas of the world are not quite as burdened by this sense of exceptionalism and the sense that nothing could ever go bad because we're number one or whatever. So I find I do more convincing in the United States and parts of Europe than I have to do elsewhere, and Canada is part of that. So North America, including parts of Mexico, a lot of convincing still, although Mexico less and less so. They get it. What's happening there in increasing numbers. So really, Piero, what was astonishing to me, the thing I had to learn the slow way, because I'm kind of slow this way, I thought I was sharing information with people, right? I'm a scientist and a business guy, so information actually moves me. But I discovered that for more than 99% of the people, information isn't the mover. They have a belief system that they're operating from, and the belief system is going to either reinforce doing something or prevent you from doing anything, depending on the belief system. So here's an example. I might be talking to somebody about peak oil. To me, it's just data. Here, I'll show you one oil well that depleted. I'll show you a gathering of them that depleted. I'll show you a whole region that's depleted. And we can look at what the remaining things are. I'm just throwing data out, right? But if somebody holds a belief system that's rooted in the idea that humans are clever monkeys and we will find some new technology that will make the peak oil argument just completely go away, all that's going to happen when I show them one more graph is they get a little more agitated, I get a little more agitated, nothing's happening because the primary disconnect between us is not the data. It's a belief system about what technology can and can't do. And so then, as soon as I detect that, I will depart into a conversation around technology, what it can and can't do. As a scientist, I'm more well-grounded in this. I understand technology does not create energy. It only transforms it, potentially. And other people don't get that. They think that, because we have iPhones that are better than they used to be, that somehow, that same cleverness will create energy. They don't understand really where we are in this story. So once I have the discussion around technology and I begin dismantling or at least putting some additional less cartoonish detail into their understanding of technology, now we can be in movement in their belief system, which means we can get them to move towards action. So I'm at the point in my life where information that doesn't lead to action is a waste of time. So all I care about, Piero, is how do I say things, what do I need to say to move somebody to action? And increasingly, and this is what's in Prosper, Adam and I live everything that's in that book. We didn't sort of write stuff that sounded like good common sense. All of this is stuff that's in action in our lives. And for me, it summarizes down to this one simple statement. I willingly, purposely cut my standard of living in half. I use half as much stuff. I have half as many things. And in cutting my standard of living in half, I have doubled my quality of life. So this is a way to begin to break that marketed to us connection that says more stuff equals more happiness. I know people in Europe are less wedded to that idea. People live with much simpler, more spare apartments, at least the ones I've been to, where the individual items in there are very carefully thought through and brought into their lives. So I think that's something that's more resonant in much of Europe. But in the United States, that's a real eye-opener for people who, have not only a garage full of stuff, but maybe a storage unit full of stuff. We're a stuff society. People have a lot of stuff. So our connect for Adam and I, it's a lot of telling people that this idea of preparing is not. It is not. This is where everybody starts. Oh, I have to prepare for the future. What do I need to get? That's fine. Start there, but hopefully very soon we can have this second part of the conversation, which is what can you do without, right? Don't design a solar system so you can run your dishwasher and your this and your that and your everything. Design it so that it will serve exactly what you need if you really need it. Yes. That would be an idea. So really, we're really trying to open this conversation up. And there's three questions. If you look into this future, three questions everybody should ask themselves. The first is, well, what am I going to just keep doing? Right? Well, no matter which future arrives, you're going to keep caring for your family and your friends. You're going to keep being a loving human being. You're going to keep trying to make a living. There's lots of things that make sense. But a second question is, well, what should I stop doing? Right? Well, you probably should stop spending money you don't have, and you should stop accumulating debt for consumable items. You should probably stop wasteful practices, however we might categorize those. And then the third and final question is, well, what new things should I start doing? And that's where Prosper really steps up to say, well, here's some skills and knowledge things you might want to begin to acquire into your life, and new ways to look at relationships, and of the things that your living capital, which for us is my body is my living capital, but so is my garden. Living capital are all the living systems that support us in our lives. So that's both ourselves and the natural world. And so there's a lot of new things people can start doing, but we're asking people to step into those because they make sense. They will add to your quality of life. They will add to your quality of life and enjoyment of life today. But if certain futures arrive, they're going to be real lifesavers.
Couldn't agree more. Well, thank you very much. And I encourage people to read your books and check out everything you do every day. There's a lot of stuff on peakprosperity.com. And Chris, let me know if there's anything in terms of data, information, but also ideas from my little Switzerland. Maybe there's some things you might be interested to get from me. I'll be very, very happy to help you in any ways that you feel that I can, because we're all in this together, and the more people will be prepared, the less there will be angry and violent people coming for what we are developing. So we need to help as many as we can.
Piero, I agree, and thank you for that. And likewise, we're in this together, so anything I can do to help you as well. And would love to get a chance to meet you at some point. So let's, whether I'm your direction or you come here, let's make that happen. And yes, we're all in this together.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And